mother. She is Jesus' mother. She is the mirror of the church. She remained faithful even at the foot of the cross. She pondered all the things in her heart. She remained faithful. Let us spend some time with Mary in her sorrows. Since Mary is a powerful intercessor, a role model of faith, and an example of how we must respond to life with equanimity in every situation, it will be to our advantage to spend time with her as we reflect on the mystery of death of Jesus and wait patiently for God's will to be done. In order to do this, we will go through the traditional $7 of sorrows of Mary and draw fruit from her response in each of these. $7 of sorrows of Mary. The first sorrow or dolor is the prophecy of Simeon. This is mentioned in the Gospel of Luke. Simeon took him in his arms and praised God, saying, Master, now you are dismissing your servant in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles, for glory to your people Israel. And the child's father and mother were amazed at what he was being said about him. Then Simeon blessed them and said to his mother Mary, This child is destined for the falling and the rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. Luke 2:28-35. Luke's gospel is the only gospel which narrates the presentation of Jesus in the temple, celebrated presently in the Latin Church on 2nd February every year, as the child is brought into the temple by the parents. Simeon, who was waiting for the Lord's coming, now takes the child into his arm and realizes that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. He can now sing what is commonly known as his Nun Dimittis, or his being dismissed, allowed to go by the Lord, because his eyes have seen the salvation which God has prepared for all nations. The salvation which God has prepared is made present in this child. Salvation is made present in Jesus. This is what Simeon can see. However, even as he is aware that salvation will come through this child, he is also aware that this salvation will not be gained or won by Jesus as a warrior king, not by a king who comes riding on a horse, nor by a king that dominates, not by a king that subdues, but a king who will carry his cross to Mount Calvary. Salvation will come through a king who will become king on the cross. It will be won by a king who, when he breathes his last breath on the cross, will say, "It is finished." Besides singing his Nun Dimittis and pointing out to the kind of king that Jesus is, Simeon also addresses his mother. And this is the first dolor of the first sorrow, where he tells her that a sword will pierce her own heart. What does this mean? Many interpretations are offered. It means that the one who looked after Jesus, the one who gave him birth, the one you brought him into the world from her womb, will have to soon let him go. She will have to let him go because he is a child who will become a man for the whole world. Mary, his mother, cannot cling to him. She cannot possess him, and she cannot own him. She has given him birth surely. She has brought him into the world surely. He was in her womb for the gestation period of around 9 months surely, but she can have no claim on him. He is too big to belong to one mother. He belongs to the entire universe. This is one interpretation of the sword that will pierce Mary's heart, namely that she will have to let him go. Another interpretation is about the derogatory comments and remarks that she will have to hear about her son, since his focus is to do God's will. She will have to hear that her son is out of his mind, that he is a corrupter and a rabble-rouser, and that he associates with sinners. Yet another interpretation of this sorrow is that she will have to see him crucified like a criminal. She will have to see that the 12 closest men he chose will have all deserted him. When it was time for them to take a stand, she will have to hear and see people making fun of him and ridiculing him. She will know that the whole Sanhedrin has condemned him and that the Romans have ordered his death. Accepted the prophecy, Mary's response is a lesson for us. When we cling to the things, persons, or to events, it teaches us that we have to let go when it is time to let go. It teaches us that the more we cling on to things, persons, and events, the more heartache we are bound to feel, and the more disappointments we are likely to face. Mary's response is thus a response in the light of the prophecy of Simeon, which asks us to imbibe that spirit of detachment. It asks us to imbibe that spirit of freedom, which is able to say, Lord, you have given me freely. You are taking away from me. Now let your servant go in peace. The second sorrow or dolor is the flight of the Holy Family into Egypt. This is found in the Gospel of Matthew. Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you. For Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, Out of Egypt I have called my son. If Luke's gospel focuses on Mary in the infancy narrative, Matthew's gospel focuses on Joseph in a dream after the child is born. Joseph is told to take the mother and the child and flee to Egypt so that the prophecy of Hosea 11:1 may be fulfilled. This prophecy says, Out of Egypt I have called my son. Jesus is taken to Egypt along with his mother and father. Mary and the child Jesus are laid by Joseph in obedience to God's will. As we reflect on this sorrow, we bring to mind the number of migrants and refugees in our world. The first refugee or migrant family in the Christian tradition was the Holy Family. The first family that had no place to lay their heads was the Holy Family. Today in our world, there is persecution all around. This persecution is so great in some countries that people have to leave their very homeland in search of places where they will be able to live peaceful lives. Our hearts go out to the migrants of so many countries who sometimes have nowhere to lay their heads. It is true that Jesus himself said to the ones who will follow him that foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Luke 9:58. Let us focus then on the impermanent nature of Mary, of Joseph, and of the child. Let us focus on the fact that they had no stability. They did not know what the next step would be. They did not know the trials they would have to face in a foreign land. They were unaware of what the outcome of going into Egypt would be. And they went with trust and faith and confidence in God. When my life is uprooted by some calamity, by some disaster, by something which I never expected to happen, how do I respond? How do I respond? When my life is turned upside down, when my plans go awry, when the situation expected to occur does not, how do I respond? How do I respond? Can I respond in faith like Mary responded when she went along with Joseph and the child Jesus into Egypt? The third sorrow or dolor is the finding of Jesus in the temple. Luke's gospel is the only gospel of the four which, as an incident in the youth of Jesus, and that is what is popularly called the finding in the temple. Now every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents did not know it, assuming that he was in the group of travelers. They went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. Luke 2:41-51. Though most interpret this scene to mean that it was Jesus who was found in the temple, my own interpretation is that it was Mary and Joseph who found themselves. It was in and through this incident that they realized their own roles in the life of Jesus. In other words, Jesus always knew where he was and where he was meant to be. It was Mary and Joseph who were unaware of where their child was. When Jesus responds to his parents on their finding him, he tells them that he was never lost. He is where he is meant to be. It was Mary and Joseph who were lost without their son. They began their search for Jesus by looking in the wrong places. They continued to look in the wrong places till they were directed to that place where Jesus ought to be and was. Where are you looking for the Lord? Are you looking for the Lord in the wrong places? Are you looking for the Lord where He is meant to be? We are blessed that the Lord today is available everywhere. This is a fact, and we must always keep this in mind. I say this because it is easy for us to find the Lord when things go the way we plan. However, when our lives are in disarray, then it is not always easy to know that the Lord is with us. It is difficult to find the Lord when our hearts are weary. It is times like these that we need to understand that our Lord is available to us. The Lord brings us into the land of hope and peace when we realize where we ought to look for Him. This Lord will say to us, "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I am always by your side?" The fourth sorrow of dolor, which is not mentioned in any of the scriptures, is the meeting of Jesus and Mary on the way to Calvary. None of the Gospels mention this scene, though it is traditional that we take it as one of the stations of the cross in the 14 traditional stations. Jesus meets his blessed mother. The Gospel of John has a scene where Jesus points his mother out to the beloved disciples at the foot of the cross. Meanwhile, standing near the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing beside her, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciples, "Here is your mother." And from that hour, the disciples took her into his own home. John 19:25 to 27. What would have been the emotions of Jesus as a son? What would have been the emotions in the heart of Mary as a mother? What would she be thinking? What would Jesus be thinking? What she said to Jesus, "I would rather you did not have to go through this." Would she say, "How I wish I could help you"? Would she say, "You ought not to have taken the risk"? Would she ask, "Was it really worth it"? Or would she say, "I am with you, my son"? It seems to me, knowing the Mary revealed to us in the Gospels, especially the Gospel of John and Luke, it would be Mary who would say to her son with courage and with strength and with determination and with faith most of all, "My son, I am walking with you on the road to Calvary, on the road to cross, and I will be crucified with you even as you are crucified on the cross." The fifth sorrow or dolor is the crucifixion. So they took Jesus, and carrying the cross by himself, he went out to what is called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him two others, one on either side, with Jesus between them. John 19:16 to 18. Would be fixed already in the ground at the place of crucifixion. Jesus would possibly carry the cross beam, and so the charge, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," would be hung around his neck, so that everyone could read what the charge was. He would walk to the place of crucifixion with the cross beam strapped to outstretched arms from behind. When he reached the place of crucifixion, they would lay him on the ground, possibly tie his wrist with rope on either sides and put the nails into his hands. Then they would lift the cross beam and insert it into the vertical post which was already affixed. Mary would have witnessed this. However, more than the physical agony, because the evangelists do not give us any details of this aspect, we need to focus on the obedience of Jesus to the will of God, even when it seemed foolish to obey that will. We need to realize that Jesus was willing to go to an extent. He was willing to do whatever it took to save. Mary, standing by his side, looking at him, being crucified, would have agreed with him and would have said, "Yes, my son, I continue to be with you." The sixth sorrow of or dolor is a scene found only in the Gospel of John, which is the piercing of Jesus' side with a lance and the taking down of Jesus from the cross. Since it was the day of preparation, the Jews did not want the bodies left on the cross during the Sabbath, especially because that Sabbath was a day of great solemnity. So they asked Pilate to have the legs of the crucified men broken and the bodies removed. Then the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once blood and water came out. John 19:31-34. The piercing of the side was because the soldiers found that Jesus was already dead. The two criminals who were crucified with him were not dead, and so they had to break their legs in order to hasten death, because the next day was the Sabbath. In the case of Jesus, therefore, in order to find out if he was dead, they pierced his side. As soon as the soldier did this, blood and water flowed from his side. What is the symbolism of blood and water? One interpretation is that blood symbolizes the Eucharist and water symbolizes baptism. While this might be true and there might be a sacramental explanation in John's interpretation, the point seems to be that Jesus really, truly, completely died. Jesus did die on the cross. Since he was dead, he had to be taken down from the cross and laid in his mother's arms. Michelangelo's Pietà brings out beautifully this scene. Mary's face in that scene is a face of both serenity and hope. The seventh sorrow or dolor is the burial of Jesus. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, though a secret one, because of his fear of the Jews, asked Pilate to let him take away the body of Jesus. Pilate gave him permission. So he came and removed his body. Nicodemus, who had at first came to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 100 pounds. They took the body of Jesus and wrapped it with the spices in linen clothes, according to the burial custom of the Jews. Now there was a garden in the place where he was crucified, and in the garden there was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. And so, because it was the Jewish day of preparation and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. John 19:38-42. The word burial somehow suggests finality. Burial suggests that now everything is complete. Burial suggests loss. Mary would possibly have been looking at the situation and wondered for at least a brief moment about her own future. However, the faith with which she said to God that she would be God's handmaid, the faith with which she approached her son and told him that they had no wine, the faith with which she stood at the foot of the cross and accepted the death of her son would be the same faith with which she looked at the burial. She would be confident that the words of her son, that he would indeed be lifted up into heaven, not merely lifted on the cross, would come true.